Hello everybody, welcome to Brandon's Haunted Library. My name is Brandon, your undead librarian, and I read and talk about fantasy, literary fiction, and of course, horror. Thank you for choosing my video. I'm excited to talk to you today because the final ballot for the Bram Stoker Awards are out, and I want to tell you all about the finalists. The Bram Stoker Awards are a literary award presented by the Horror Writers Association for superior achievement in horror writing. Named in honor of Bram Stoker, author of the seminal horror work Dracula, the awards have been around since 1987 and have been awarded to many great writers over the years, including Robert Matheson, Thomas Harris, Tanana Revdu, Richard Lehman, Dan Simmons, Peter Straub, and of course, Stephen King. There are 13 categories, and my video today will put an emphasis on the fiction categories of longer formats for adult audiences. In particular, I'll spend a lot of time discussing each of the nominees for the superior achievement of a novel, with my subjective thoughts and opinions sprinkled in. But this video will also, at a minimum, let you know the nominees for all other categories, even those that I don't have a lot to say about. And I'll have timestamps below if you want to jump around to any of those categories. In addition to all the novel nominees, I'll also give some of my thoughts on a few of the novellas and debut novels that I'm familiar with and enjoyed. Award winners are selected by voting of the Horror Writers Association and will be announced at StokerCon on June 14th. So let's not waste any more time and let's dive into the nominees. So I'm going to start with the category I'm most interested in and the one you probably opened this video for. The finalists for Superior Achievement in a Novel are Gabino Iglesias with House of Bone and Rain, Stephen Graham Jones with I Was a Teenage Slasher, Gwendolyn Kist with The Haunting of Velkwood, Josh Mallerman with Incidents Around the House, and Paul Tremblay, Horror Movie. The finalist pool is a bit of a mixed bag for me, with a couple that didn't quite hit as hard for me compared to the others, and two books that really exceeded my expectations. One of those books that I really enjoyed was House of Bone and Rain by Gabino Iglesias. This is the second Bram Stoker Award nomination in this category for Gabino Iglesias. His first being in 2022 for his novel The Devil Takes You Home, which won this award in addition to the Shirley Jackson Award. Now, I personally have not read The Devil Takes You Home, but I definitely plan to, especially with how much I love this book. House of Bone and Rain follows 5 teenage boys living in Puerto Rico who seek vengeance when one of their mothers is murdered in an act of gang violence. Together they must find who's responsible for her death as they navigate the criminal underworld, all while a terrible hurricane blows through their homes. And in their culture, hurricanes are known to bring evil spirits to shore with them. This story is part coming of age, part crime story, and part horror story, as mysticism and gritty realism blur in this supernatural thriller. All of Iglesias' characters in this are beautifully crafted, feeling so incredibly real and so easy to empathize with, especially with everything they go through in the story. I adored these characters. The decisions and experiences of the teens were so believable to how kids like them would navigate the violent and bloody paths that their situation snowballs into throughout the story. And look, I cannot speak highly enough about the quality of writing that Gabino Iglesias delivers. It's a gritty story, but written with such luscious and vivid prose. The description of the setting and the destructive force of the hurricane really transported me and made the story feel so real, even when it took supernatural turns. And some of those supernatural moments were so wild and horrifying, some really memorable moments for me. This is a story of grief and brotherhood and had some really gut-wrenching moments in here. This was violent, bloody, and beautiful. Gabino Iglesias is a powerful storyteller, and I'm glad to see this incredible novel nominated. Next up is another book that I really enjoyed from an author that's quickly becoming one of my favorite contemporary horror writers. I Was a Teenage Slasher is the 5th book by Stephen Graham Jones nominated for Superior Achievement of a Novel. His 2020 novel, The Only Good Indians, and his 2021 novel, My Heart is a Chainsaw, both won this award in their respective years. Told as a fictional memoir, I Was a Teenage Slasher tells the story of Tully Driver, a high schooler who confessed to murdering classmates in the summer of 1989, and essentially is an origin story for a slasher villain. It is an incredibly unique premise and is not as straightforward as it might sound. I found it so creepy reading about the violent acts being committed through the perspective of the slasher that carried them out. The circumstances of how and why Tully did what he did made this novel so interesting and compelling. It was written with an almost true crime level of detail, but has a supernatural angle that really elevated the novel beyond simply analyzing the mind of a serial killer. The horror is intense with vivid gore and shocking moments delivering on the slasher promise and made me wince within the first 50 pages or so. But the horror is offset by humor and a surprising amount of emotional depth. The writing is raw and stream of consciousness, showcasing Stephen Graham Jones' writing ability while also reflecting his own experiences as a teenager in West Texas. It's weird to call this a personal novel, but it did feel really personal. This feels like a true reflection of Stephen Graham Jones' passion for the slasher genre, building on themes from his previous Bram Stoker Award-winning novel, My Heart is a Chainsaw. If you are a fan of the slasher genre, I think you might really enjoy this one. I'm happy to see this thrilling and entertaining read nominated. Next up, let's talk about The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kist. This is the second nomination in this category for Gwendolyn Kist, with her novel Reluctant Immortals being nominated in 2022. She was also won a Bram Stoker Award in the first novel category in 2018 for her debut, The Rust Maidens. The Haunting of Velkwood is a ghost story about a suburban block known as the Velkwood vicinity and its inhabitants that mysteriously vanish behind a mysterious barrier that only 3 young survivors are able to cross. What happened is a mystery to scientists and occult experts for 20 years until one of the survivors agrees to research her to re-enter her neighborhood to find answers. This was such an interesting premise, and I was excited to pick it up, but for me it didn't quite land and was ultimately a little bit forgettable. To look at the positives, this was an original approach to a somewhat common but compelling trope of ghost stories and haunted houses being metaphors for trauma and grief. Kist does an excellent job at describing the girls' traumatic childhood and showing how it's impacted them and continue haunting them. In addition to themes of trauma, it is also a compelling look at female friendships and queer relationships. It was a bit of a slow burn with a melancholy and eerie atmosphere created by some impressive writing, but ultimately what the story built up to in its final chapters didn't have the impact that I was looking for. And maybe that's on me, as I did have a hard time connecting with these characters. Also, as this is a horror award, I will say that the horror elements are certainly quite tame compared to the other finalists. I personally walked away from this book a little underwhelmed, but there was a lot of things I really adored about this novel. Next up, Incidents Around the House is the 6th nomination in this category for Josh Malerman. It's a story told from the perspective of an 8-year-old girl named Bella, and her family are haunted by an entity she refers to as Other Mommy. When she first meets Other Mommy, she sees her as a friend, but she soon starts asking Bella if she can enter her heart. Bella always says no, but over time, Other Mommy gets impatient and begins making her presence more known around the house to show how far she's willing to go to enter Bella's heart. Now, I can't say much else to avoid spoiling things, but it's a haunting story ambitiously told from the perspective of a child. This is the first book I've ever read from Josh Malerman, but he is a pretty well-loved writer within the horror community, and a lot of people, particularly on BookTube, rated this as one of their favorite horror reads from 2024. But unfortunately, I did not love this as much as some did, but I totally get the appeal. Other Mommy was such a good antagonist. She was pure nightmare fuel and a frightening presence that delivered some deeply disturbing moments. And it was certainly impressive to have this novel written solely from the perspective of a child, using childish language but still creating an eerie atmosphere and some truly scary moments. For me, this narrative choice did get a bit exhausting after a while, but all in all didn't bother me too much. It was an ambitious choice for Malerman, and I think ultimately paid off, allowing the reader to experience the story from a child's perspective. The dialogue of the other characters bothered me a bit and wasn't realistic and took me out of the story a few times, but all in all, it was a fun reading experience and worth checking out. Next up is Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. This is the 4th nomination in this category for Paul Tremblay, and he has won this award twice. First for his 2015 novel, A Head Full of Ghosts, and again in 2018 for his novel, The Cabin at the End of the World. Horror Movie calls itself a twist on the cursed film genre. And yeah, it's definitely a twist, and certainly is twisted. The main story follows the attempted remake of an infamous horror movie made in 1993, which was never completed due to traumatic incidents that are gradually hinted at throughout the book. The last surviving member of the original cast and crew, an unreliable and verbose narrator, details the making of the original film and the process of getting the remake off the ground, but tells the story in a scattered, puzzle-like narrative structure jumping between time and including segments of the film's original script. In the film, the narrator plays the Thin Kid, the slasher villain or maybe the victim of the story, and the lines between real life and the film get incredibly blurry. This book is hard to put into words, but I loved it. I found it such a cool reading experience. It was certainly confusing because of how it was formatted and the unreliability of its narration. In fact, if you check Goodreads, you'll see a lot of frustrated and disappointed reviews. It clearly won't be for everyone. I totally understand why people don't like this, but if this book lands for you like it did for me and many other readers, you're in for a ride that you might lose sleep over. It's a slow burn, but that works to its advantage as it slowly builds. It gets more messed up and even a bit gory, and is often effective in doing so. The way it tackles its themes of fear, horror fandom, capitalism, bullying, and teenage angst makes this book as much about the psyche of the reader as it is about the Thin Kid and everyone involved in the movie. It's not perfect, but if you appreciate experimentation and creativity, you might really like this book. I'm glad to see Paul Tremblay nominated again. He is such an exciting writer in the horror space. Now, the question of who I would vote for in this category is a good one. It is possible for two winners. In this case, I would love to see Gabino Iglesias and Stephen Graham Jones share the award. Their novels were definitely my personal favorites of the nominees, but I don't think you're allowed to submit two votes. So between the two, I am surprisingly leaning towards Gabino Iglesias with House of Bone and Rain. This might be recency bias since I read the Stephen Graham Jones books a few months ago, but I really did enjoy House of Bone and Rain. I also think that Stephen Graham Jones has a strong chance of winning for 2025 with The Buffalo Hunter Hunter. I'll link where you can find my review here, but that's definitely premature to say as it's only April and Stephen King's releasing a novel in May. All that to say, I'm inclined to give my 2024 vote to Gabino Iglesias. And before I move on to the next category, I want to take a quick moment for the 5 books that were longlisted but didn't make the final ballot. Those are C.J. Lead with American Rapture, Tim McGregor with Ein Hollow, Nick Medina with Indian Burial Ground, Cynthia Palaio with Forgotten Sisters, and Chuck Tingle with Bury Your Gaze. Of these, I read and really enjoyed Indian Burial Ground and Bury Your Gaze. I shared my thoughts on these in my video on the Goodreads Choice Awards, which I'll link here if you want to check that out. And the other 3 are on my TBR not simply because they were nominated, but either because I'm a fan of their previous work, in the case of C.J. Lead, or the premises of these books sound interesting to me. Alright, next I want to talk about the nominees for Superior Achievement in Long Fiction, which means horror novellas, essentially. The nominees are Sophia Arjam with Coup de Grace, Nat Cassidy with Rest Stop, Clay McLeod Chaplin with Kill Your Darlings, Eric LaRocca with All the Parts That Won't Easily Burn from This Skin Was Once Mine and Other Disturbances, Eden Royce with Hollow Tongues. I've read and really enjoyed 3 of these. Coup de Grace by Sophia Arjam is set in the subway system of Montreal and follows the first-person perspective of a man on his way to commit suicide. But when he gets off the subway at his stop, he finds himself trapped as the turnstiles don't turn and there's no outgoing trains. This is an incredibly psychological and surreal novella that gets pretty dark and disturbing as days pass while our protagonist tried to find his way out. It is difficult to describe, but it felt like a fever dream reading this. And beyond the disturbing imagery and horror appeal, the layered exploration of a man with suicidal thoughts was compelling to read. The ending was creative, and I thought it tied up the thematic statement and impact of the book well. And it's also impressive that this is Sophia Arjam's debut. If you enjoy psychological books that are mind-bending and challenging, I definitely recommend you check this one out. Next up of the novellas I read is Rest Stop by Nat Cassidy. This was one of my favorite reads from last year, and is about a young musician who gets trapped inside of a rest stop bathroom in the middle of nowhere. I won't say much else about the plot because getting to experience how this story unraveled is part of what made me love this book so much. This is a pretty bloody and gruesome book and probably is the closest to extreme horror or splatterpunk that Nat Cassidy has written. And I don't even like splatterpunk, but I really love this. It was such a stressful page turner and he expertly captured the feeling of excruciating psychological and physical torture. And despite the blistering fast pace of this book, there was also room for introspection and depth given to our main character, making this book greater than just a gore fest. This was a great horror novella that I would definitely recommend checking out. Last of the stories I've read is All the Parts of You That Won't Easily Burn, which is a novella-length short story in Eric LaRocca's collection, This Skin Was Once Mine and Other Disturbances. In this story, a man goes to buy a kitchen knife for his husband to use at an upcoming dinner party. He encounters a strange shopkeeper who draws him into an intoxicating new obsession that sets him down a path towards mutilation and destruction. This one was dark and definitely nauseating. This will appeal to a particular kind of horror reader, definitely one that isn't squeamish. It introduces discomfort very early on in the novel and lets you sit in that discomfort until it gradually and suddenly ramps up to 11. It's not the type of horror I would typically pick up, but considering that, I still thought this was very effective at what it was trying to accomplish. Great for anyone interested in something more extreme. Next, I'll give you the synopses for the novellas I have not read. Kill Your Darling by Clay McLeod Chaplin is about a man that joins a fiction writing workshop decades after the unsolved murder of his teenage son. He decides to write about his son's story as a way to process the senseless crime and find a fictional closure that life never provided. But as the story takes on a life of its own, someone from the past is compelled to come out of hiding before he reaches the end. Clay McLeod Chaplin has been a writer for Marvel Comics for about a decade, but in recent years started writing horror books such as Ghost Eaters and his newest novel, Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. And finally, here is the synopsis for Hollow Tongues by Eden Royce. After a major accident leaves her in a dire financial situation, Maxine Forrest returns to live in her childhood home, which brings back memories of her father's abuse and her mother's resistance to leave. Escaping the sins of her parents should be easy enough for Max, but those sins are intrinsic to her genetic makeup, so escape is impossible. Succumbing and metamorphosis are inevitable. Eden Royce is most known for her middle-grade fantasy novels, but she has also written a number of horror books for both children and adult audiences, and is also nominated this year for one of her middle-grade novels. Without having read all of these works in this category, my vote for superior achievement in long fiction would go to Rest Stop by Nat Cassidy. Next up, let's look at the nominees for superior achievement in a first novel. The nominees are Danye Coles with Midnight Rooms, Jessica Drake Thomas with Hollow Girls, Jenny Kiefer with This Wretched Valley, Monica Kim with The Eyes Are the Best Part, and Lindy Ryan with Bless Your Heart. I've read only one of these, but I think it's worth discussing how much I enjoyed The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. It follows Jiwon, a young woman whose life unravels after her father abandons her mother and their family, leading to a disturbing dreams and dark obsession with eating eyeballs. It's a feminist psychological horror that is both unsettling and unforgettable. It's gotten a lot of hype on BookTube, and I absolutely think it's deserved. She expertly explores themes of misogyny and racism into this grotesque and visceral story. It was a bold debut, definitely worth checking out. And I'll give you a brief synopsis of the other nominees before moving on to the next categories. Midnight Rooms by Danye Coles is a historical gothic horror novel set in Victorian England, and is about a bride who moves into her husband's large and decaying mansion. Weird things start happening in the mansion, and she has nightmares and wakes up with bruises, making her question where her dreams end and reality begins. Hollow Girls by Jessica Drake Thomas is a folklore-inspired horror novel about two girls that go into the woods, but only one returns, with no memory of what happened. 24 years later, her father vanishes, leaving behind research about what might be lurking in the woods. This Wretched Valley by Jenny Kiefer is a survival horror about 4 rock climbers that hike into the Kentucky wilderness. 7 months later, 3 mangled bodies are found. One body just a skeleton, the second emptied of its organ, and the third a mutilated corpse with the tongue, eyes, and ears, fingers removed. What happened to these climbers, and does the missing survivor have the answers? Bless Your Heart by Lindy Ryan is a vampire mystery novel about a grandmother, daughter, and granddaughter that run a funeral home in a small town in Texas. When one of their dead rises as a vampire, it is up to the family to fight back and protect their town. Alright, I'm going to be going faster through the remaining categories. For Superior Achievement in a Fiction Collection, the nominees are Laird Barron with Not a Speck of Light, Mariana Enriquez with A Sunny Place for Shady People, Angela Sylvain with The Dead Spot, Stories of Lost Girls, Tim Wagoner with Old Monsters Never Die, Mercedes M. Yardley with Love is a Crematorium and Other Tales. For Superior Achievement in an Anthology, the nominees are Sophia Arjan with Bury Your Gaze, an anthology of tragic queer horrors, Rob Costello with We Mostly Come Out at Night, 15 queer tales of monsters, angels, and other creatures, Carol Geisander and Anna Tarbosky with Discontinue If Death Ensues, Tales from the Tipping Point, Doug Morano and Michael Bailey with Long Division, Stories of Social Decay, Societal Collapse, and Bad Manners, and Lindy Ryan with Mother Knows Best, Tales of Homemade Horror, a Woman in Horror anthology. For Superior Achievement in Short Fiction, the nominees are Laird Barron with Verses, from Long Division, Stories of Social Decay, Societal Collapse, and Bad Manners, Rachel Bolton with And She Has Been So Reasonable, from Apex Magazine, issue 147. Sasha Brown with To the Wolves, from Weird Horror number 9. R.A. Busby with 10,000 Crawling Children, from Nightmare Magazine, January 2024. And Raven Jakubowski with She Shed Her Skin, Nightmare Magazine, November 2024. Next up is a stacked category for Superior Achievement in a Screenplay. The nominees are Scott Beck and Brian Woods with Heretic, Robert Eggers, Henrique Galeen, and Bram Stoker with Nosferatu, Coralie Fargeau with The Substance, Osgood Perkins with Longlegs, and Jane Schoenberg with I Saw the TV Glow. These were all incredible films. We were blessed with some really good horror last year. My pick and confident prediction is that Coralie Fargeau will win for The Substance. But it would be pretty cool if Nosferatu wins, because then Bram Stoker would be awarded a Bram Stoker Award, because the source material for Nosferatu is Dracula. Next, for Superior Achievement in Long Nonfiction, the nominees are Anna Bakutskaya with Feeding the Monster, Why Horror Has a Hold on Us, Jeremy Dauber with American Scary, A History of Horror from Salem to Stephen King and Beyond, Heidi Honeycutt with I Spit on Your Celluloid, The History of Women Directing Horror Movies, Emily C. Hughes with Horror for Weenies, Everything You Need to Know About the Films You're Too Scared to Watch, Cassandra O'Sullivan Sakar with No More Haunted Dolls, horror fiction that transcends the tropes. For Superior Achievement in Short Nonfiction, the nominees are Michael Arzenell with Screaming in the Rain, the orchestration of catharsis in William Castle's The Tingler, from What Sleeps Beneath, Vince Liaguano with The Horrors of Donna Barazzato, and Her Feast of the Seven Fishes, from You're Not Alone in the Dark, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock with Hidden Histories, The Many Ghosts of Disney's Haunted Mansion, from Disney Gothic, Dark Shadows in the House of Mouse, Kevin J. Wetmore Jr. with Jackson and the Haunting of the Stage, from Journal of Shirley Jackson Studies, Volume 1, Number 2, Lisa Wood with Blacks in Film and Cultivated Bias, from No More Haunted Dolls, horror fiction that transcends the tropes. For Superior Achievement in Poetry, the nominees are Jamal Hodge with The Dark Between the Twilight, Pedro Iniguez with Mexicans on the Moon, speculative poetry from a possible future, Lee Murray with Fox Spirits on a Distant Cloud, Sumiko Salson with Melancholia, a book of dark poetry, L. Marie Wood with Imitations of Life. For superior achievement in a YA novel, the nominees are Adam Cesar with Clown in a Cornfield 3, The Church of Friendo, Anne Freistate with A Place for Vanishing, Natalie C. Parker with Come Out, Come Out, Laura Senf with The Losting Fountain, Joelle Wellington with The Blonde Dies First. For superior achievement in a middle grade novel, the nominees are Mary Aberling with The Curse of Eelgrass Bog, Michael Brent Collings with The Witch in the Woods, Adriana Cuevas with The No-Brainer's Guide to Decomposition, Robert P. Ottone with There's Something Sinister in Center Field, and Eden Royce with The Creepening on Dogwood House. And last but certainly not least, for superior achievement in a graphic novel, the nominees are Robin Ha, The Fox Maidens, Beth Hetland with Tender, Patrick Horvath with Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, Gao Tanabe with H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu, Maggie Unber with Chrysanthemum Under the Waves. And that's all the nominees for the 2024 Bram Stoker Awards. Have you read any of these? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below and let's discuss. Thank you if you stuck around to the end of this video. You are all amazing for doing so. Please like and subscribe and share this video around if you know anyone that you think will appreciate it. And as always, stay spooky and I'll catch you in the next video.